Testing, testing.
Dream when you're feeling blue. Dream, that's the thing to do.
Should I do an introduction just in case? Hi, I'm Callie. I'm a third-year student at the University of Guelph studying art history and classical studies, and my focus is on education and antiquity. We're in an age of information, and there's an abundance of knowledge at our fingertips, whether that be reputable or not. With this, it's a common debate as to what we should be teaching our children, but this is not a new question. Agesilaus, king of Sparta, pondered the same questions when he stated, "That which they will use when they become men." Taking a look at this in a much less sexist and general context, what he's trying to say is that we should teach our children what they'll use when they grow up. Hearing this sounds quite obvious, but when you take a step back, have we been doing this? A large majority of what you learn in school is never used in real life, and what we should be doing is fostering the inherent interests of our children. But instead, we are following the guidance of curriculums created by those with specific interests at heart. Our current education system dates back to the industrial period, created by minds like Horace Mann. We are governing the concept of schooling based on the dated need for factory workers. We are teaching children in batches based on their manufacturing date, control them by ringing bells, and expect them to listen all day and follow directions. A successful student in this setting would be rewarded for compliance and the ability to meet industrial standards. From this, the student will get graded on their quality, grade A, like grade A meat. The Latin root of the word education is educare, meaning to nourish and to bring up. We should be focusing on the individuality of children and focusing on their strengths rather than trying to force them into a specific mold. To gain an understanding of our current systems, I want to take a look at the systems of antiquity, so that would be Sparta and Athens. However, it's important to address that the term education system may look a lot different in antiquity than it does now. The goal of an education system is to solve a problem, meaning to teach something with a specific outcome in mind. This can be broken down to a simple equation. Problem plus solution equals success. In modern terms, our equation may look something like this. Overpopulation and the expectation for greatness, plus rigorous schooling and a ruthless grading system equals a highly educated population and the ability to cipher through who's the best of the best. This equation greatly differs from country to country and time period to time period, but in all settings there's a problem which they're trying to solve. Before getting into it, there's a vital need to address the concept of formal versus informal education. The idea of education has been plagued by the expectation of writing papers, standardized testings, and the expectation for a child to succeed. However, we are learning every day simply by living, whether that be through self-reflection, our family, friends, experiences, trauma, relationships, and more. There are some things in life that cannot be taught in a classroom. And besides that, there's not enough time to teach everything they need to know about life in the setting of a classroom. And more specifically, there are skills, manners, time management, and morals which are expected to be taught in a student's free time. But it's vital to establish that formal learning doesn't sit higher in terms of importance compared to informal education. Therefore, we cannot place bias on education systems of the past, but only analyze whether their systems were good at their job. Let's take a look at the Spartan education system. The problems they're trying to solve is A, constant war, B, a need to increase their population, and C, solidify control over their population. Their equation may look something like this. War, underpopulation, and political insecurity, plus militant training, avoidance of luxuries, and harsh control. And that would equal a strong military force with people who don't know the importance of freedom, so therefore they don't look for it. Lycurgus, who founded the military-oriented reformation of the Spartan society, knew that this kind of solution could not be left to informal training. To craft a society as strong and as ruthless as the Spartans, they had to take extreme measures to assure this. This type of training couldn't be left to the parents and guardians because they have a soft spot for their kids. They don't want to put them through such harsh realities. Their education system was thus set in place to transform their youth into soldiers, which they needed to solve their equation. At a young age, Spartan children were not given enough food, no warm clothes, no soft beds, and no shoes. If you couldn't endure the system, you'd die, and it created a kind of curated natural selection process. While this was brutal, it was successful, and keep in mind that we're taking a look at the process and success of their system rather than the righteousness. When going into battle, they had accustomed themselves to the hardships that most would struggle with, but this kept them focused on the task at hand. Spartans were known for their placement in war, but they also had some of the best literary skills in antiquity. They know that to be able to communicate and to write when necessary, they had to assure that their army was literate. Although this universal literacy was used to perpetuate actions like slavery, it was impressive nonetheless. They had created a society filled with individuals who embodied courage, character, and strength. Their population had a unanimous outlook on life and their endeavors, which is exactly what allowed them to be so successful. But there were many flaws. While the Spartans were extremely successful with their military and strength, they created band-aid solutions. They taught control rather than compromise, so therefore the people they were attempting to suppress would revolt. They knew how to fight head-on but nothing else, so when cities hid from the Spartan soldiers, they didn't know what to do. They didn't capitalize on their wins. They didn't feel the need to take control because they didn't really want to. They didn't feel the need to loot because luxuries were not allowed, nor were they accepted in Sparta. Although they were easily corrupted and swayed because after a life of such hardships, once they're exposed to these luxuries, they don't really want to leave. The Spartans were strong believers of nurture trumping nature. In the story of Lycurgus, he presents two dogs, one of which is hunting in nature, who he has kept as a pet, and the other is a lapdog, who he trained to hunt. He places a rabbit in front of the two, and when the rabbit takes off, the small lapped hunting dog begins the chase. The point of this was to prove that no matter an individual's innate ability to succeed, there's always room to improve and to practice and to get better. They didn't give the option to opt out because you felt inadequate or not smart enough or not intelligent enough. But when you look into modern day lens, this is one of the biggest aspects which hold people back. There's a mindset that to be good at something, you need a basis. You need to have access to money, you need to already be smart, you need to already be strong. It doesn't take long to address whether you feel you have those qualities, and if you decide you don't, you're not really that inclined to try. It's trying that makes the difference. The Spartans didn't allow their soldiers not to try. The Spartans didn't allow for people to get discouraged. You could be cold, wet, and miserable, but giving up wasn't an option. It is their lack of belief in nature which made them so successful, and it's something that we can really learn from today. Now let's take a look at Athens. Their equation may look something like this. Political unrest and the yearning for individuality, plus democracy, personalized education, and an emphasis on the arts, equal free people who are able to fight for their freedom and express themselves. Athens represents the antithesis of Sparta. While the Spartans were disciplined, hierarchical, and didn't feel the need to indulge in the arts, Athens was chaotic, free, and fostered some of the greatest minds. Their fighting style represented this unanimous feeling of togetherness, which strayed from the concept of divine kingship. A strong representation of their army was their navy. The state would provide the ships, and anyone can be a rower. This meant that you didn't need your own equipment or wealth, you just had to be passionate and show up to fight. Their education system was left to the individual rather than the state. All genders had the ability to learn, and their systems were divided to being taught at home, by tutors, or some were not even taught at all. A lot of the individuals were actually semi-literate due to the complexity of the material they were working with. By the 5th century, they have an alphabet, but that's a pretty new concept. They have no spaces, no punctuation, no capitalization, and no paragraphs. In modernity, literature and learning to read really hold your hand. We have intentional pauses, exclamation marks, questions, paragraph breaks. What we are currently reading is curating how you should be reading the material. But in Athens, they only had the bare minimum, the letters. This made learning to read much, much harder. Not only did you have to learn to read the words on their own, you had to decipher the material, analyze the tone, and figure out what you're supposed to interpret from this. Reading was much more critical work, and this is exactly what made it so hard to become fully fluent. If we did the same thing to kids today, we would be asking them to read Lord of the Rings if it looks like this. They hadn't attempted to simplify their reading to teach their children like we do today. Nowadays, we make children's books, which use everyday language and slowly allow you to work up to more complex materials. One could likely figure out what this says, but for a beginner, that proves as a really daunting task. Athenian children, however, had to tackle the hurdle of deciphering Homer. Professor Eleanor Dickey, whose research focuses on ancient education, created this really immersive experience for children in reading England. This became known as the ancient classroom, and utilizing their research, they wanted to offer children hands-on experience to what it would be like to be a child in antiquity.
When we started this ancient schoolroom, it lasted about an hour, and it now lasts an entire day, so it's developed quite a lot.
The children that we've brought today, they're being dealt with singly. So I was rather surprised at the informal, gentle, almost child-centered approach.
There's no set start time to an ancient school. The teacher is there first, the children walk in one at a time, and the teacher never talks to the class as a whole. The teacher gives you an exercise and you go and do it individually. And when you're ready, you come up to the teacher and you go over it with the teacher individually. Because it's so different from what we do, it helps them get into the swing of acting like an ancient child.
In our school, we usually do it all together. We do the same thing, but there's everyone sitting around like doing different things.
I liked writing on the ink, but also I really liked trying to read the poetry. Because usually we just use like paper or look at the board. It's quite nice to use different things and use the wax tablet or the ink.
We're not really used to using ink. We're used to using pens or pencils. It's just interesting to see how much our lives have changed.
Yeah.
Prominent ancient teachers wrote about the importance of tailoring education to the individual child, and this is what Dickey is exactly trying to showcase. One of the benefits of this was the attention which each individual child began to receive. This method of teaching could be extremely beneficial and successful at focusing on a child's strengths. As their mandate states, they put children on a continuum rather than drawing a firm line of what divides a child between special and normal. Children are encouraged to work at their own pace, and this can avoid the feeling of feeling behind or feeling inadequate, as perhaps the Spartan education or even our own modern education system might perpetuate. This idea bled into the political systems with the creation of the assembly. It was a system where anyone can speak and advise, acting as one of the first inventions of intentional free speech. Mandates and decisions came together by a vote, and no matter how the general views opposed, they had to abide by what the decision was, because that's what the assembly decided. Both the political systems and the education system curated a society which valued their freedom, which is what made their system so successful. Individuals would fight with their lives because they were so scared of their freedom being taken away from them. This greatly differs from the Spartan society, who fought because that's all they were ever trained to do. Two different approaches led to an equal amount of passion, but Athens had its downfalls as well. The idea of free speech and independent learning meant that to be well-informed didn't actually get you anywhere. There was no measure of your individual accreditation. Therefore, in the assembly, what got you somewhere was being persuasive and being emotionally moving or inspirational. The Greeks placed great importance on the study of rhetoric and speaking, which is what got them to this place. Plato's theories inspired the concept of the university, and we see almost an exact copy and paste replica into our modern world. While reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, I was delighted to be reading Adam Beresford's translation, who describes that the work is a written transcription of Aristotle's lecturing. Teaching in the Lyceum in the 330s and 320s BCE, the setting acts as extremely similar to that of our modern-day university. Beresford mentions that Aristotle would have been lecturing the same material over and over again, and in the writings he refers to this lecturing style as a course. The modern adaptation of this, however, has switched the philosophical discourse to technical training to prepare students for the working world. And this is far removed from its original intent. I mean, Aristotle in his lecturing taught about what it meant to be a good citizen. And by modern definition, it appears that what it means to be a good citizen is less about morals and qualities and more about compliance. Of course, there are downfalls to this system. Due to their free speech and their individualistic learning styles, this left for a society to be governed by a wide range of backgrounds and outlooks. On the surface, this sounds ideal, but decisions can sound ideal and be completely unproductive in the long run. As an entire population, when things went wrong, they scrambled to find somebody to blame. This can be seen in the execution of Socrates, who they pinpointed as a symbol of flawed teaching. However, removing teachers from the equation would not stop the process of learning, and regardless, removing a prominent feature can stir revolt and outrage from the individual supporters. Therefore, this system, though sounding ideal, in theory still has flaws. Parallels can be drawn to our own government styles today, as we scramble to find people to appoint blame. Though I'm not suggesting a more militant system, I think it's just important that we recognize and learn from the failures of the past. Antiquity to this day holds an important place philosophically, but it also has a remaining impact on our pedagogy and methodologies of today. As we can see with both the Spartan and Athenian teaching styles, there are parallels that we can draw from our own classrooms. Comparisons can mainly stem from the Spartan education system, but a much less extreme version. Like the Spartans, we created a rigorous and curated process of natural selection. Where the Spartans died if they were unfit, We instead have implemented a grading system which can symbolically kill off a student's aspirations. Though not a physical death, their ability to succeed after being told that their work is not good enough can destroy their creativity and motivation. Similarly, we have a really strong attention to control, as the Spartans did. This may have been more extreme, but we've created a specific schedule for children and students to follow. This can be in regards to the 6-hour school day, which begins at a specific time, being allowed to eat when told it's appropriate, and having to ask to relieve bodily functions. We also have a specific path, which we expect these children to take, first through elementary school at ages 4 to 5, secondary school, high school, and college or university. If someone doesn't achieve all these steps, there's a guaranteed social judgment which follows. We also have a similar idea to the Spartans surrounding individuality. While they treated each child the same and expected them to pursue the same path, we have created a system which is ironically doing the exact same thing. There is a hierarchy of subjects and future jobs which we perceive as more impressive than others. Along with the grading, we have a high expectation that students must master the same materials instead of flourishing with their own interests. Athenians showcase a lot of qualities which we would perceive as ideal in our society today. Their emphasis on individuality is something that our system should be looking to encourage. And of course, with the creation of the university, we see a version of that today. We of course have access to free speech, but do we really? In our system, with the perpetuation of standardized testing, there's not really opportunity to speak or produce work freely. There's a singular figure of power which acts as the keeper of wisdom, but this can be comparable to divine kingship. It doesn't matter what students produce, it's only allowed if the king-like figure deems it worthy. Subjectively, we really aren't that similar to the Athenians in concerns to education, although we place them on a pedestal. This is ironic because we present the Greeks as a fountain of knowledge and success in the arts, but we present the Spartans as angry villains. So if you take a look at comparably how close we are to either one of the systems, we fall more in line with the Spartans. So what are we really trying to say about ourselves? A lot of learning in antiquity was done through storytelling, and coming from a modern position when we read these stories, there's definitely messages that the ancient authors wanted us to take away, similar to our modern-day children books. As we all know, Icarus flies too close to the sun after his father's warning, and his wax wings melt and he falls to his death due to his own naivety and ambition. The moral can be taken away not to be too ambitious or greedy. Likewise, we know Narcissus, who falls in love with his own reflection. The message, which is extremely prominent with the rise of social media, is to be aware of your own vanity and not to fall into an obsessive pit of self-adoration. Within these stories, the characters are informally learning for the most part, through events that happen in their lives, emotions they're feeling, and the fates changing to not be in their favor. This was presented through theater and oral retelling. This draws parallels to how we can formally learn today. Through movies, music, and other creative outlets, we can learn so much by taking away what we wish from the stories and images we hear or see. Academia doesn't always have to be confined by what we perceive as what learning is supposed to be. Reading material which is feeding you what you think you thought is similar to the modern way of learning to read. Like I mentioned, it holds your hand. When reading a scholarly article, you're given someone else's opinion on something else, whatever that may be. And it's guiding you how to feel about the material rather than letting yourself come up with your own ideas and your own opinions and your own perception of what they're trying to say. Lecturing, testing, even the prompts given for an essay question, it usually has a specific agenda in mind. They're based off facts, yes, but the tone and additional details directs you to a specific way of thinking about a subject. I'm not saying this isn't valuable, but it's important to address that if you're learning this material for the first time, you want to come at it with your own opinions rather than reading somebody else's bias. So rather than accepting the first thing you read as fact, be aware that there is bias at play. What's exciting about creative endeavors is that the world is truly your oyster. You can express how you feel or what you think in such creative ways, and there's no boundaries to how you can express this knowledge. With this, viewers and readers can interpret this in their own subjective way. There's a strong underappreciation of the vitality of visual literacy in our education systems. A lot of people nowadays will go their entire lives thinking that they are not creative or innovative, and I think this has a lot to do with how little freedom of thought we really have in our school systems.
You'll never have that kind of relationship in a world where you're always afraid to take the first step because all you see is every negative thing 10 miles down the road.
You gonna take the professor's side on
Don't
this?
give me a line of shit, no.
Look, I didn't want the job.
It's not about the job. I don't care if you work for the government. But you can do anything you want. You are bound by nothing. What are you passionate about? What do you want? I mean, there are guys who work their entire life laying bricks so their kids have a chance at the opportunities you have here.
We are taught from a really young age that to write a paper, you need to learn how to reword without plagiarizing, but then also make the thoughts your own. And that's just confusing. This is creating an endless cycle of thought. It's hard for students to think outside the box when they're taught to follow the rules. I'll talk a little bit more on this later, though. There are examples of educational figures in ancient literature. For example, Chiron, the centaur, who lives on Mount Pelion.
In my world, I'm known as Chiron.
He acts as an extremely important role in the character development of individuals like Achilles, Jason, Medea, and Actaeon. Chiron acts as a teacher figure who, in the case of Achilles, gives him an education surrounding things like music, medicine, horses, hunting, and defense. Stories like these are some of the only ones which present the importance of formal education in antiquity. As Achilles goes off into the world, the skills he was taught by Chiron are virtually used in every aspect of his heroic conquest. So even the Greeks acknowledged the importance of a teacher figure and formal knowledge, but they didn't take away from the fact that informal learning was equally as important.
You see what low grade you made on your weekly mathematics test? More than half of you failed. Most of those who passed just got by. Nobody had 100%. This is the poorest class I've had in a long, long time. Most of you have no foundation at all. Now, the trouble's with your attitude. You don't pay enough attention in class. You don't do enough work outside of it. You don't know what the word study means. You haven't the slightest idea. Don't you realize that mathematics is an important subject? I tell you right now that unless you get over your lazy habits and come up to the standards I've set for this class, many of you will have the pleasure of repeating this course next semester.
Modern education. This is a tricky one. It's hard to criticize something that you're currently living with and something that you're currently working in. But looking at the ancient sources, not much has realistically changed. I didn't realize my academic potential without failing first, and there's grown to be a disconnect that at the core of learning is the necessity of failure. We are currently placed in a system which pushes the idea that failure is a bad thing. Like Sparta, failure can be an emotional death. Failing is the single worst thing that can happen to a student right now. And frankly, it's just confusing. I mean, when I learned to ride a bike, I was always told to get up and try again. But you can't get up and try again today, like not without a penalty at least. So if it's essential to fail in order to grow, but I'm in a system which won't let me fail, then what am I doing here? I memorize word for word what my teachers have taught me, and I attempt to regurgitate that information when the time is right. And when I get back my marks and I realize that I'm adequate at having no original thought, there's not really a lot to look forward to. But it's difficult with standardized testings to even give students the opportunity to flourish.
Curriculums are created by policymakers, most of which have never taught a day in their life. Just obsessed with standardized tests. They think bubbling in a multiple choice question will determine success. That's outlandish. In fact, these tests are too cruel to be used and should be abandoned, but don't take my word for it. Take Frederick J. Callie, the man who invented standardized testing, who said, and I quote, "These tests are too cruel to be used."
I mean, if we're taught that there's only one right way to do things, how are we supposed to be innovative or imaginative or creative in any way? How are we expected to feel engaged and interested when we're being told what is right and not given the opportunity to question that? I just want to make a disclaimer that this isn't always the case. There are amazing teachers and amazing individuals in education, but for the most part, it's a lot of tyrannical rule in schooling. There are some gems, and those gems are people that change people's lives forever. I know I've had teachers in elementary school who I still think about things they've said to me today, but for the majority, they haven't had such a pleasant experience. I went to school thinking that I needed to know what I wanted to do and that I had to already be good at something to pursue it. If I didn't fail myself by having no interest in my first program, then I would have never gotten to where I am today. I didn't fail grades-wise, but I most certainly count that as a failure mentally. This failure led me to realize that I love the historical side of art and that I love antiquity, and I love when those two things get mixed together. But at the ripe age of 16, when I walked in to see my guidance counselor and I expressed my interest in learning about the arts and visual culture and the world around me, I was hit with immediate judgment. Why is it that art is deemed as a less intelligent career path? Why was it that the initial reaction of my guidance counselor was to steer me clear of a path in the arts? This is a judgment which has plagued my academic career as I've moved forward in double majoring in art history and classical studies, but this judgment is beyond me. Art surrounds us, and art makes up the majority of our collective history. I have talked to so many people who are excited to ask what I'm doing in school, but when I finally tell them, I'm hit with, well, what can you do with that? It's a simple question, and I doubt it's coming from malicious intent, but when you ask my friend who's studying a traditionally more respected area of study, it's hurtful when you don't ask them or doubt their abilities to perform. Now, much further into my studies, I question whether I let my own insecurity, which was created by an environment of doubt, be the reason that I didn't let myself fully enjoy the path I had chosen. Questioning someone's abilities to create a career out of their passion causes doubt. And it is this doubt which is exactly what I'm attempting to address. We can't live our lives uncomfortable with the unknown. This is what failure thrives off of. We have to get used to doing it anyways, and we need a system which supports that. Learning has been trademarked by the school system as something you do in a classroom, but that's simply untrue. Our education needs a complete makeover in every sense. The system is dated, as I mentioned before. It's modeled around the concept of industrialization with the purpose of creating a certain kind of worker. We have to make systematic changes to foster creativity, and creativity doesn't just mean art, but it's one of the clearest examples of it. Creativity can be innovative thinking, which can be applied to maths and sciences. We are setting kids up for failure, not just in academics and their grades, but we're setting them up to be frightened of failure and growth. This can be so detrimental to somebody's life. I mean, so far in my life, I've placed my worth on my marks, and I've never accepted the need for growth and the necessity of failure for that growth to happen. This fear of failure is bleeding into other aspects of our lives that don't use such harsh requirements. I always go back to this Mark Twain quote that I read years ago: "I never let schooling interfere with my education." There's a major lack of autonomy currently within our system. We are given no freedom in schools and are sent into the working world where we need to make our own decisions, have time management skills, and teach ourselves to be productive when we've only ever known to do what we're told.
I didn't bring them up here to ridicule them. I brought them up here to illustrate the point of conformity, the difficulty in maintaining your own beliefs in the face of others. Now, those of you, I see the look in your eyes like,
I would have walked differently. Well, ask yourselves why you are clapping.
and we all have a great need for acceptance. But you must trust that your beliefs are unique, your own, even though others may think them odd or unpopular, even though the herd may go, that's bad.
Dr. Peter Gray, a professor at the University of Boston, once compared schools to prison, and this sounds dramatic, I know, but I think he's making a point. Truly, what is the difference? Obviously, other than having to go to prison, you need to commit a crime. But with such strict requirements, not only in the physical setting of a classroom, but within the ways we are interacting with the material, we're not allowing students to get the most out of what they're learning. Not everyone is programmed to read a book, write a paper, and then move on. Some have trouble reading the book in itself, and aside from that, not everyone benefits or are talented readers and writers. I know for myself the best way I can interact with materials is by doing something creative with it. And I'm completely capable of writing a paper, and a pretty damn good one for that matter, but that's just not the best way that I engage with materials. I don't nearly get as much out of a paper emotionally and mentally as I do from creating art. Creativity offers us unique methods of research and inquiry that can allow your brain to venture into the unknown. The participation in artistic experiences stimulates positive emotions, and in other words, it just feels good. It can evoke vivid reactions and connections from not only those who are making it, but those who see it. And I'm not saying there isn't value in traditional paper writing and presentations, but I urge that it's not the only way. If we continue to separate our students' emotions from learning, we're not allowing for their minds and interests to flourish. The school system is built with business in mind rather than people in mind. Emotions can control the students' attention and their motivation to learn and will inevitably affect their capacity to succeed. Albert Einstein, or maybe not Albert Einstein, we're undecided about this, but somebody once said, "Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid." First of all, we need to question why an individual's value is being placed upon their ability to perform these tasks in the first place. But besides that, somebody who might be Einstein is exactly right. For every guardian I have ever met, I can guarantee they'll agree that every child is different. We can't expect our students to go through such a narrow route where their perception of self is degraded by the fact that if they don't fit into this cookie cutter that we've decided is a good student and come out thriving, then we're doomed to fail. This is a systemic issue. Our curriculums are built on a hierarchy of subjects. We think that art, math, and science is so different, but in reality they're not. They may have different outcomes, but their solution is embedded in the same type of problem solving. In today's system, it's very easy to cheat your way through school or cruise by doing no work. We want to create a learning environment where this is not only more difficult, but also that it should not be what a student strives for. We have to allow students to think creatively and innovatively, otherwise we're not going to get anywhere. Art can foster this. Artistic judgment can evoke critical thinking, and for some, simply looking is more effective than being told what to think. Art confronts the viewers with a visual riddle, and they need to use their past knowledge, hypotheses, and personal experiences to decipher it. In the world where there's no wrong answers, such as in art, there's a natural sense of comfort from the freedom of visual and critical exploration. There's a modern art piece which really encompasses how a lot of people feel in life, in school, in work, and even in relationships. Entitled Can't Help Myself, this industrial robot attempts to repeatedly scrape back this deep red liquid, which everything it tries, the liquid always seeps back out. No matter how hard it tries to clean up and finish the job, there will always be more. I know for myself, I feel this way too often. Sometimes no matter how hard I study for a test, or no matter how many examples I can think of, it's never enough to get that 100%. This feeling of helplessness, which this machine out of metal represents, can relate to so many of us. School should be evolving as the world does. I mean, a car from 100 years ago is ridiculous compared to what it is now. When the telephone was invented in 1876, it looks drastically different from what we have now. However, a classroom from 100 years ago looks exactly the same. Education should be evolving along with the rest of the world, and it should be geared towards the individual rather than sticking to a strict tyrannical rule. Co-learning should be emphasized, especially in higher education, as teachers are still human beings and they don't know all the answers. Let the students pick their topics and let them engage with something that will benefit them the most. Although students right now are a minority in our populations, they're 100% of our future, and I know it sounds preachy, but should we not be fostering their creative minds? It's ridiculous that the most common question asked in class is this going to be on the test? That's actually laughable. Education teaches you to memorize the dots when it should be really teaching you to connect them. Some of the most creative people in the world didn't know it during the process of being educated. I know so many people who have no idea what they're capable of and they're not even willing to try, but creativity is not appointed to specific people. Like everything, it takes practice.
Hey. Don't ever let somebody tell you you can't do something. Not even me. All right?
All right.
You got a dream, you got to protect it. People can't do something themselves. They want to tell you you can't do it. You want something, go get it. Period.
We depend on innovation, but then rely on people who have their confidence bullied out of them. Human beings are not machines. They don't work in a singular way. Take a plant, for example. They're living organisms and they have the ability to flourish under certain conditions. Some require more light, less water, higher humidity, but as Sir Ken Robinson uses in The Perfect Metaphor, farmers know you cannot make a plant grow, but you have to provide it the space to do so. If you create the conditions for something to grow, it will, and humans have the capacity to do so, and they will. We are creating an army of people who want to provide the world with quality contributions, but who decides what that quality is? Who set the standard for quality? In all the history that we learn, we should know that the world is an incredibly unreliable critic. I talked to a couple of friends and family who are actively criticizing academia, and not just in a creative sense, so let's hear what they have to say.
My name is Isabella, and I am a third-year sociology student. And one of my passions is looking at academia through a racial lens.
My name is Samantha Gibson, and I'm Métis on my mother's side from the Métis Nation of the Rising Sun in Gaspé, Quebec. And I'm also of settler ancestry from Scotland and England on my father's side. I just got my Bachelor's of Science in Kinesiology from Queen's, and I'm currently in my first year of my master's at UVic for kinesiology, and I'm focusing on Indigenous health equity.
Hi, I'm Leilani. I'm studying biomedical science with a minor in math, and my focus is mainly in racialized health equity.
I'm Alexis McDonald Anderson. I am in my third year of classical studies at the University of Guelph, and I am minoring in museum studies. And my personal current niche is I love learning about people. Just love learning about people and how they work.
So I personally identify as a queer, gender non-conforming Filipino person, or like Southeast Asian person. Coming to a PWI, like a predominantly white institute, my experience was not very similar to my white counterparts.
So I identify as a queer person. I've also grown up in a very Indian immigrant family, so I'm a first-generation Canadian. I also grew up in the Catholic school system, so that was definitely, influenced a lot of my life. It was pretty strict and definitely shaped a lot of, the morals that I had growing up, and really affected, how my life has changed since then, and me navigating through, unlearning a lot of things.
And I am an Indigenous person, but I don't look like a typical Indigenous person. And so I'm very white passing, which means I really don't fit into a lot of the white culture, but I also don't fit into the Indigenous culture because I don't look like I should. When I say anything about Indigenous academics or Indigenous culture, it seems less valued because I don't fit into the stereotype. And that's something that needs to change in our academic world and in society in general.
Academia as we know it is the ivory tower, and it is built upon colonization and capitalism. And my goal is to deconstruct how we view academia, what's viewed as professional, what's viewed as correct, and with everything being done, especially towards things like anthropology and sociology, we really need to make things less white-centered.
Coming to UVic, I'm now in a Western institution pursuing Indigenous academics. So that makes it difficult to have confidence in your work in an institution that doesn't support the way that you're doing your work. And it also poses a lot of limitations on the way that I can complete my thesis, because when I'm doing my thesis work, I want to do it in a way that is in a good way, in an Indigenous way, where it's holistic and inclusive, and I'm working with the community that I'm focusing on. But within the institution, there's rules that I have to have my whole plan done up before I even talk to them. I have to have my proposal done without even conferring with the community to see if what I plan to do is all right. And that just doesn't seem fair.
This can be anything from the language that we're using, how formal is it, how accessible is it for everyone else to read, as well as how it's being shared. We're lucky with the university to be able to access all these documents, but these would otherwise be inaccessible to the general public, which is crazy because education should be free.
Coming here, my supervisor wants me to be innovative in my methodology and be super creative and do it in Indigenous ways. But then I have other profs in my methodology classes telling me that I need to use Western traditional methods to complete my thesis, where in an Indigenous environment, you might do a talking circle or more creative outlets that allow people to express themselves in more ways than just words. So another thing that was surprising to me when I came to my master's was how much it was just completely on my own. All of my education up until now has been very structured, and I had a lot of rules I had to follow, and assignments were very strict with no creativity allowed. But then coming here, I was in an Indigenous course where we had to create our own methodology or talk about methodologies in our own Indigenous interpretation. So what I ended up doing was talking about the research methodology, the typical Western research methodology, but comparing it to the process of beading fringe earrings, which I'm wearing today. And I looked at how each component of beading fringe earrings can be compared to a component in Western research methods to show that they're pretty similar. Like, there are comparisons, which means that Indigenous ways of knowing are valid.
Religion in itself in education systems, like for example, when my parents were growing up in India, in their area in Goa and like other places, there was mainly only just, regular public school, or there was a Catholic school. That's why I feel like, a lot of immigrants who come here nowadays, they changed a lot of the rules, like you don't have to be baptized and things to go to Catholic schools. And there are a lot of, immigrants from the Middle East or from South Asian countries that end up going to Catholic schools because they, again, are interpreted as like more respectable and, will help shape their children into being, more obedient and things like that.
Also, representation within faculty, that is a huge one. It doesn't just mean to have like X amount of like Black or Asian or like white staff. You have to genuinely create safe spaces for faculty and for students.
In terms of like school itself, I would say that the people are definitely different. There are a lot of teachers, some are totally fine, they're more modern, they have, different viewpoints, they will voice out sometimes, but there is a lot of boundaries to what the teachers are able to talk about. I remember when I was in grade 8, this was before I even figured out I was gay. Like when I was in grade 8, I remember my teacher, I loved him. He was like literally probably my favorite teacher in all of elementary school. And so, but then the one thing that he said, he's like, if you ask me about anything gay related, I can't answer that. it was just like a weird thing to hear from a teacher. They were just like, I'm not allowed to say anything, so don't even bother asking, like I can't say anything. But when I was in elementary school, it was very like hush hush. We couldn't talk about anything. Not only, you know, have an opinion on it, like they just could not say a word about it, which is so weird. The rest of the teachers, like there were a lot who were very like, you're going to hell kind of thing. Like they didn't know about me, but they would say stuff like that in our religion classes. So it's like, you know, and that was totally normal and allowed because it's a Catholic school. And as long as it, you know, ties into some way in the Catholic faith, they're allowed to say what they want.
A research article that I read recently was called Tales to the Ivory Tower, and my recommendations are very similar, if not the same as theirs, and there should be more workshops for white folk to unlearn and to relearn and re-indigenize their own learning as opposed to focusing on people of color or marginalized groups to do the teaching. It's not right. If we're creating safe spaces, we really have to question, why do we need these safe spaces for these people? Who is doing the harm, and why are the people doing the harm not the ones doing the work? It is very often that racialized students, such as myself, have to do the work and have to advocate for ourselves, even in spaces where I shouldn't have to. I shouldn't have to explain my boundaries and what I'm comfortable with and why things are not okay to say. That's not my job. I am not your teacher. I do not get paid to do those things. And being in a PWI, I feel like there's a lot of expectation for people to be like, I'm willing to learn, but won't learn on their own time.
It feels weird to say that the problem with school is school itself.
So after grade 5 and 6, I kind of placed a lot of value, my self-value, on how I achieved in school. And I ended up doing the International Baccalaureate program in high school, which I have to say was not worth it. And for anyone who doesn't know, it's a program where you're doing university level content in grade 11 and 12, and you can get university credits for certain courses that you do at a higher level. But it is extremely stressful and not something that's necessary for a high school student, but I did it anyways.
I think it's honestly my biggest problem is testing. Because like I, in certain subjects, test okay with like the normal way to test, where it's like you go and you study for a week or you cram because you're so busy with doing everything else, and then you just memorize everything and then you forget it.
And then coming into university, I felt like I had a lot of stress on myself on how I performed academically because university was hard. And when I didn't do well, I took that as, oh, I'm a bad person. And that created a lot of anxiety around schoolwork.
I know a lot of people, I know at least when I'm watching people present or when I'm watching lecturing, I zone out because I'm too self-aware of my own body that I'm like, oh no, do I look okay sitting here? Do I look like I'm listening? Do I look like I'm taking notes properly? Almost to the point where like I'm not even processing what the person's saying to me.
See, the problem with school is literally every human being is different. Like we are all so different and we learn so differently.
Within the resources that the university provides, they are not equipped to deal with all of their students. They're only equipped to deal with the ones who they really want here.
We could be in the same class. We are in the same class. And I still sometimes write like the more papery types, and you do creative projects because that's just how you learn better.
I've been making videos since I was younger. I never learned in the traditional way, and I've always made video stars and iMovies and like just a bunch of things. And every time I had a presentation, I hated presenting, so I'd always make a video, but then slowly as time went on, it got more and more complex. And like even handing it as an assignment instead of a research paper, I feel like it brings this whole other level of like, oh, this is like actually a lot of work. Because I think that creative projects really get undermined sometimes as like the easy way out. But sometimes they take even more time, or like sometimes they're even more difficult to achieve. Because we've been writing research papers for so long, we're just hardwired to work that way.
But then, like, he runs into the problem of, how do I grade this? How do I grade their work and give them a grade that, like, reflects how well they do? Because their project does not fit into the school's criteria.
In the younger grades, I was always doing the art projects. Like, I love doing the art projects and all the art classes. And I wasn't that interested in math and science. I was actually really bad at math. In grade 11 and 12, when I did the IB program, I actually traded my art classes to do the IB program and do more science and math, and I hated it. And it kind of beat the creativity out of me because it wasn't valued at all. And so I kind of stopped being creative for a while. But now that I'm in my master's and shifting my mindset, I'm actually coming back to it.
Because I'm in the humanities, I have to engage with text a lot. But unfortunately, the way that testing and schooling works is you're not allowed to engage. You just have to recite who wrote this when. Like one of the best tests that I've ever done, one of the best exams was an art history exam where we were just given an image, no knowledge of it, and we had a week to just find out anything we could. It was full of messages and meaning, and when you're finding messages and meaning in art, it's extremely personal. So how can you mark it as like, what does this mean, A, B, C, D? That's not, it doesn't work. It doesn't make sense.
And then coming into my master's, I feel like I'm trying to shift my sense of worth with my academics a little bit. I'm focusing more on what I can achieve personally, and then my academics are kind of just, that's great. If I get my master's certificate, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter if I got an A in all of my courses or if I got a perfect review on my thesis. I just want to pass.
I have been brainwashed where if a prof is like, here's a paper, you have these dates, this time period, write about anything, literally anything. My brain is like, well, I need rules. I need to know like what I can write about. And then the prof's like, you can write about anything. And it's like, no. You need to tell me like, okay, you can write about like these 10 guys, because they're all guys. Or you can write about like this type of architecture, blah, blah, blah. Like I have been brainwashed to not be able to do like, go crazy.
I'm breaking boundaries in my own skill set because I'm gaining new skills while doing a creative endeavor, while interacting with material creatively, while making it engaging for audiences.
You find a solution and then you just have like 12 other problems that come with it.
Yeah, making things accessible for all students and being able to provide accommodations. If we're paying over $3,000 a semester, we should be able to have some say as to what we're learning and be able to kind of guide or like direct the class in things that we're actually interested. Obviously there are some things and theories that are like mandatory to know, but it's just how are we engaging with it, and as well the power dynamic between professors and students is like outright, it's terrible.
But yeah, it's just insane that it took a global pandemic to figure out different ways of presenting media. And I know for the Guelph Classics Symposium, they had to post it on YouTube because there wasn't a setting that everyone could get together and watch the presentations. So they put it on YouTube, but that turned out better in the long run for some people because you could watch it on your own free time and you could think of questions, then go to the discussion prepared. And I know for myself at least, when I'm presented with material, it takes me like 2 to 3 business days to process that information and then come up with questions that are actually worthwhile. So I think it's really interesting how COVID has brought out a lot of solutions, or at least progress towards solutions that we have needed for a long time. While doing all this research, I wanted to know if the people around me felt the same as I did, so I made a survey and I got 46 responses. I once heard Sir Ken Robinson ask his audience what they thought about their intelligence levels versus their creative levels, and I thought the responses were really interesting, so I wanted to try it out on my friends and family. I asked, do you consider yourself intelligent, on a scale of 1 being I'm the opposite and 10 being I'm the epitome of intelligence. And just like I thought, majority of people found themselves to be more than average intelligent, but not genius level scholarly, except for 3 people apparently. And then I asked, do you consider yourself creative? And I was saddened by the response because the numbers were different. Out of 46 people, 12 of them found themselves to be 5 or below creative. This differs drastically from the intelligent levels. There's not a single person who found themselves to be less than average. But what's funny is that what Sir Ken Robinson was trying to point out is, why is there a difference? Why do people feel the need to answer different numbers? This reiterates that there's a common understanding that creativity does not equate intelligence, and this is what needs to change. I went on to ask some of my own questions, and I have to share the stats. I asked, does standardized testing provoke anxiety within you? And 73.9% of people agreed that yes, testing is anxiety provoking. So following this, I wanted to know if the schooling system had affected their mental health at some point, and 89.1% of people agreed that yes. Now this one was a mixed bag. I wanted to know if people felt pressured to pursue a specific path, and it's a little all over the place. But majority, being 37 out of 46 people, felt that they were pressured. Without prompting creativity specifically, I asked whether they thought that school systems allowed children to flourish, and this can be in any sense, and 87% of people agreed that no. So finally, I threw in my creativity idea, and I wanted to know whether school systems fostered a creative mind, and 82.6% of people thought that no, it doesn't. Now these are super interesting stats, not just because they reiterate what my hypothesis is, but because the people who answered were from all different ages, career paths, and life experiences. So it's not just one type of person, such as me, who benefits from creativity, but all across this widespread audience, there's so many people who think that creativity is essential to learning. Just in my little bubble of people who took time out of their day to help me, it's clear that people are stressed about school and that they don't feel like they got or are getting the most out of it that they can. On a whim, I threw in a question that was open-ended, and I was hoping people respond, and they definitely delivered. I left it open-ended, asking what they thought about schools, because I'm no expert. I don't know the solutions, nobody does, but I wanted to hear if we could come up with a couple of band-aid solutions. Promote diversity and having supports in place for children to release energy and be able to focus on work. Not punishing kids for being energetic in class, hiring teachers who want to teach and won't traumatize students, accepting creative and other kinds of works on assignments, not punishing students for learning in different ways, stop perpetuating a system of shame for not having high grades, not being controlling, and that's just off the top of my head. Identifying strengths of individual students in order to grade accordingly. Be more adapted to an individual's needs and learning habits of students. Deinstitutionalize assessments, move away from grade numbers. Allow for different learning styles and assessment styles. The school system tries to put everyone in a box while simultaneously telling everyone that we're all so different. These are just a few, but it's really refreshing to see that their outlooks fall in line with mine. Overall, I wanted to take a look at how antiquity differed from us, but it's super interesting to see how many similarities there actually are. As a reminder, our basic equation for modernity is overpopulation and the expectation for greatness, plus rigorous schooling and a ruthless grading system equals a highly educated population and the ability to cipher through who's the best of the best. Theoretically, I think that our system does what it's meant to do. I mean, with a population of 7.8 billion, there is kind of a need to cipher through who's the best of the best. But the consequences of our system are detrimental to the mental health of our students. We need to teach people to think for themselves, develop motivation to succeed, and help them in finding a lifelong passion for learning that extends beyond test scores and graduation day. While our system succeeds at its end goal, it's not a question of reformatting or changing the equation. I think we just need to completely scrap it. We need to change what that end goal should be, and I'm demanding that we have that conversation. Thank you.
Can't the future just wait? Can't the deadlines come fashionably late? I could push every goal back, take control back if they'd roll back the rate at which time starts to fly. Never landing or standing by, never taking a break, ever making me retry. We nickel and dime every quarter to two. But maybe it's time to let time pass